What's up, guys? All right, this is kind of a first Ableton tutorial video. I decided to start with basically best Ableton default set. So what does that mean? So default set is basically what comes up when you initially load Ableton. So it's like, what kind of channels do you have? What kind of sends and returns? Basically just, by default, what loads up, and so this is really important because it's all about speeding up your workflow, because when you're trying to be creative, um, you want to just you just want to make the workflow as easy as possible to get out of the way of you being creative. So give yourself a lot of tools and put a lot of things that you commonly use in the default set just so that they're there and you don't have to go get them again every time and set them up again every time. They'll just be there for you. So that's really important in building your default set. Other thing I think is kind of important here is not to load it up with too much heavy stuff, because last thing you want is like go to launch Ableton and it takes a year for it to start, So I just loaded up with basically all built-in Ableton stuff because I know there's no third-party VSTs or effects by default in my set. And that's just because I just want to get going and I just want to have fun most of the time. And I just don't want it to be slow. So, and Ableton's built-in stuff is pretty good. You don't need a whole lot of these third-party VSTs, although, when you get down to the final stages of mixing and things like that, then you get into okay, I want to bring in all my really fancy kind of VSTs and plugins at that point, but not initially. So here is just my default Ableton set. Let's look. So basically, when you go into preferences and you go into file folder, there's this first option here, save current set as the default, save and clear. So whenever you get your Ableton set, your initial setup, and you put all the groupings in it and all the tracks and have everything the way you want it, and you're like, okay, this is the way Ableton should load initially when I start it. So you set all that up, and then you come in here and you click save, and then it saves however you have Ableton set up at that point as the default. And then obviously you can clear it, and that puts it back to kind of factory settings. But you want to go and do all the stuff you want to do to the set, then open preferences, go to file folder and hit save. And then you're good to go. So default set, it's about speeding up your workflow. So for me, it's a very particular set of things. So I have a couple of different groups, a couple sends. So let's take a look at those. So I have a kick group, or potentially a kick clap or kick snare group. And I put, those things in there, and I put things in there that I want kind of side chaining by default. Look at all these other groups that I have. Drums, I have a generic compressor with side chain to the kick group. The music, the same thing. I have a generic compressor, side chain to the kick group. Bass, vocals, even on my reverb, I have the generic compressor here. So it's just so by default, every single time it's I have to set up all the side chaining. Well, it's already there for me. And so I just have to basically at that point then dial in the appropriate amount of side chain to dial it into taste. And then you're good to go. You don't got to change anything else. You don't got to set anything else up. It's ready to go for you. So, right, so all my groups have this generic compressor. Generic compressor is a Ableton default setting, which I just load in and then I tweak. It's a preset that Ableton has. They all have the same one. So Right. So look here, I have drums. I throw all my drums into a single group typically. I have music, which, is a weird term, but that would be my synths, my keyboards, my guitars, mallets, harmonies, melodies, anything, that's not drums and is not bass. I have a group for bass. Now, this group will contain typically the top bass and the sub bass. So, all layers of the bass signal that I have. And then I have a group for vocals. Now, vocals is kind of just, it's there. Not all tracks have vocals. Not all my tracks have vocals. Um, but some of them do. And if they don't, you just go to this group, delete, and you can remove that. So that's kind of everything that I have here. Now, I want to point out that on my individual tracks, all my individual tracks, I have something called my standard audio effects rack. Now, this is something that I built and I basically saved into my library. You have your user library basically that has a bunch of presets. I have an audio effect rack, several. One of them happens to be my standard audio effects. So this comes by default. Anytime that I command T or I command Shift T for a MIDI track, I get my default effects on that track for free. Now, this is a little bit beyond the default set, but whenever you have a default MIDI track or a default audio track, there's an option here at the bottom where you can save that, and you save basically all of the settings on a default single track, such that when you launch a new one, it comes with that stuff for free. So it is kind of part of your default set. It's a part of, getting you set up for success and a quick workflow, giving you all the things that you do every time anyways for free. So what is in my default effects rack? Well, what do I do on basically every single track? I apply some EQ to it. I compress it potentially, aggressively or very transparently. And I saturate the signal a little bit. I give it a little color. So just look, the EQA, I basically set it up with some high pass filters because a lot of times I will do this just on every track. It depends, except for bass and sub bass especially. I will high pass the signal to kind of, provide a little more room in the mix. Something that you want to do. Anything that doesn't have bass shouldn't be throwing a lot of bass signal out there. I have this also set up in a mid side, so I can kind of tune my mid and my side independently, mid signal, side signal, and I typically will then bring up the side signal a little bit more. We can get into that more later about why. And then I have generic compressor again. However, this one is not side chained. It does not have the side chain active. It is just compression. This is a generic compressor again as an Ableton Default, which I tweak slightly. But I'll adjust to taste, on like kind of, however seems to be the right amount of compression for a track. And then I have a bit warmer. It's a saturator. It's an Ableton preset, which I just kind of pick by default, and then I will kind of like adjust to taste. So it just kind of, depends. I just want to give myself like something for free, something to kind of start with, And I don't have to have all these on all the time. I can just have EQ and compression or just EQ, and it's like always there. So I can just come through and bam, 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 bam. Okay, bam. Okay, good. Okay, a little compression. Okay, bam. Okay, boom. Sounding good. You know, it's like quick, it's fast. I can just do that on everything and it's there for me. It's easy. So let me go into like the sends here. So a lot of times people will have like reverb and delay, right? Now I have a reverb send. You can see I have the music and the vocals kind of going to it by default. It's 75%. So, and I actually have a another Ableton preset, medium room, which I believe I've tweaked a little bit just to make it a little more atmospheric. But that's just kind of there by default because I want to give, you know, the whole mix, like put it in a space essentially, and it's there for doing just that. And I also have my sidechain generic compressor, which is on all of my groups on this as well, because a lot of times I will kind of sidechain this ambiance to the kick drum and the kick clap. Here's my standard effects rack again, if I need it, you know. And typically I will have this, and then I'll kind of pull back the level, you know, to taste, like where it feels right, you know. It won't be like 100% all the time. I'll pull it back until it feels right. Now, the other one that I have here is a parallel compression of the drum signal. So I run the drums out. Now, the drums are here, and they might be compressed a certain amount, but, you know, fairly dry. This is kind of like my parallel compressed drums track, which I just set up for, you know, all the time. I feel like you always want something like this, so why not just put it in the default set? So it is a heavily compressed signal. And again, I will, you know, bring the level into taste of the compressed drum signal. But also I have, so this is a drums full parallel. It's a Ableton default. I also have this warm-up highs, also an Ableton default saturator. And I just kind of do this to like, because you know, and the drums, you kind of want to make them like stick out a little bit in the mix and like kind of saturate, you know, the high end there a little bit and give it like a really crispy, trying to bring out like the crispiness of the drums there. So I try to bring out the crispy, parallel compress it. You know, a lot of times put compression directly on the drums and like a chain, so you have like a dry wet signal. But for me, I just put it in a send, as I always feel like I need that, and then I dial it into taste. So what else is left here? The master. So it might look like I have a lot of stuff on my master by default. Notice it's all turned off, except for the limiter at the end, which is, and this EQ. This limiter at the end, right, is just to like prevent the signal from blowing out anybody's speakers. This EQ, you know, I scoop off the kind of sub frequencies from the side signal at the end, because sub signals are always in mono, you know, so you just, all that extra information is just preventing your mix from being able to be louder. So you just take it all away. I have a couple multi-band compressors here. This is a standard multi-band compressor. It's an Ableton default. You know, I put it here, and then this is kind of to mess with these levels to kind of like give it like a really like pre-master. It's a pre-mastering kind of thing. Like, I do this, I adjust these to taste, you know, however it sounds right. Just kind of like, because when I'm like having fun and making a track, like, I don't know, it just feels right to me to have like a pre-mastered kind of sound. You know, why I'm being creative. A lot of people tell you not to do that. You know, I most of the time do it anyways. So I have this here as a pre-master, and then this more I just kind of adjust the inputs on the various signals. So I want to pump up the bass, turn down the mids, turn up the highs. That's kind of what I'm tweaking in the second one here. So it's more of just like an EQ, a 3-band EQ. That's what I'm kind of using it like. And then I have over here another Ableton preset, mastering, make it loud. This kind of lets me just push the signal, make it louder until I kind of start to see something register on this end limiter. And like I said, this is kind of a pre-mastering chain. And, in the end, whenever you're like, this is kind of what I do from being creative, the creative process. In the end, obviously, when you export this, and when you're mixing it, particularly before you're going to export it, you turn all this off, except potentially your leave a limiter at the end, just in case. But you turn all this off, and then you really do your mix after you've been creative, all that kind of good stuff. You've got a song, turn that off, mix it, export it, create a new project, a mastering project, and then use all those heavyweight, fun VSTs and stuff on that master. And even like in the mixing process, you turn this off and then you go with your heavy VSTs on your mix, export it, new project, mastering project, then again, use your good, all your fancy VSTs and plugins and stuff on that master. So, yeah, this is my default set. So you can see when I go File, New Set, Don't Save, Loading, boom, came to my default set. Everything is right here, just how I want it. Makes it nice and effective for me to get going, keep going really quickly, and be creative and have some fun. So don't forget the end preferences, file folder, save default set, save current set as a default, save. Next time you want to get started, it'll all be ready to go for you. Speeding up that workflow and making you, as productive as possible, just getting everything out of the way and letting you be creative. All right, guys. I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for watching. Until next time.